This photo, captured by an Army field photographer whose name has been lost to time, shows a German woman in POW denim cradling an American newborn while a stunned U.S. soldier stands frozen in the doorway behind her. No caption was written. No official report ever explained why a German prisoner of war was holding a baby wrapped in an American flag-patterned blanket, or why a blizzard raged outside a ranch house where enemies suddenly stood inches apart. Some historians claim the POW was being escorted to a medical outpost. Others insist she had just saved a life. But the real question is the one no one has been able to answer for decades. What happened in the minutes before this shutter clicked? What terrifying, impossible choice forced a German POW and an American family into the same room on the coldest night of the war? And why did this moment become one of the most quietly extraordinary stories ever recorded in the history of German POWs in America? January 4, 1945. Alpine Valley, Wyoming. The wind came first, long, hollow, and furious, ripping across the snowfields like something alive. Then the sky vanished behind a wall of white. Within minutes, the blizzard had swallowed the mountains, the ranch roofs, the cattle fences, everything. Snowflakes as sharp as glass stung the skin, and the cold cut straight through wool and bone like a blade forged in some polar hell. On a narrow stretch of pasture half buried in drifts, an American woman fell to her knees. Her breath came in short, ragged bursts, each one visible in the darkness. She clutched her belly, fingers clawing through the fabric of her coat. Her cry was lost instantly in the storm, absorbed by wind, carried away into the endless white. Not far behind her, stumbling through the blast of swirling ice, came a German woman in POW denim, her hands bound earlier that morning and only recently freed. The blizzard had already soaked her thin shirt until it clung to her skin like a sheet of ice. Her hair was stiff with frost. Her lips trembled uncontrollably. And yet she dropped to her knees beside the American without hesitation. She was a prisoner of the United States. A woman trained under a collapsing Reich to fear, resent, and distrust everything American. And now she was the only person within 30 miles who knew how to deliver a baby. The nearest doctor, an aging man who serviced half the valley, was trapped behind a wall of snow 10 miles east. The road to him was already gone. Every telephone line had collapsed under the weight of ice hours earlier. The husband, who had run frantically back to the ranch house to find help, had returned with only one option left. The German midwife brought in with the labor crew that morning. He barely trusted her, but he had brought her through the blizzard all the same. The shock of that choice still hung in the air, as heavy and dangerous as the storm itself. The German woman pressed a hand against the American's back, feeling the trembling muscles beneath the soaked wool. Her fingers moved with practiced certainty despite the cold numbing them. She had delivered babies before, dozens back in Hamburg, before the bombings, before the firestorm swallowed whole neighborhoods and left her helping women scream their children into a world that was collapsing overhead. Her breath faltered at the memory, but she forced it away. "Lie back," she whispered in German-accented English. The American woman obeyed. The wind howled around them, flinging snow in violent swirls. The sky was gone. The land was gone. Only the three of them existed now. The laboring mother, the terrified husband, and the prisoner crouched in the snow preparing to do the unthinkable. But Act 1 does not begin in the blizzard. It begins hours earlier, inside Barrack 12B of the POW labor camp. The barrack had been built for 20. It now housed 43 German women. Wooden planks lined the walls, and the air smelled of damp wool, sweat, and kerosene. The single stove in the center sputtered weakly, its flame barely enough to warm the boots directly beside it, let alone the entire room. The storm had begun as a distant gray smudge along the eastern ridge that morning, but by midday the wind rumbled like artillery, rattling the windows and shaking the roof. Inside, the women huddled together under thin army blankets. Some whispered prayers, some muttered curses. Some simply stared at the walls, as if willing themselves to be somewhere, anywhere else. For many, the cold was the familiar enemy. They had felt it on the Atlantic crossing, trapped for weeks below deck, watching their breath rise in the dark. They had felt it in Hamburg's ruins when the city fell to ash and the winter wind blew through broken stone. And now they felt it here in America. Different sky, different captors, same bitter freeze. But America was not Germany. Even in winter, the POW camps followed rules, strict, bureaucratic, surprisingly humane rules. Rations, 3,000 to 3,500 calories per day. Meat 3 times a week. Milk, butter, bread, vegetables when possible. Medical care when needed. Protection under the Geneva Convention. It was more food than many of them had eaten even before the war, more than their families in Germany could dream of now. And despite the cold biting at their skin, they knew they would not be abandoned. This country, this enemy, fed even those who had fought against it. It was a truth none of them had expected when they stepped onto American soil. Outside, the United States roared at full power. Factories in Detroit lit the sky day and night, pouring out bombers faster than anyone believed possible. Shipyards along both coasts produced Liberty ships like clockwork, one every 3 days. In 1944 alone, America had built 96,000 aircraft. The world was still burning, but the United States stood tall, unified and confident in a way that felt almost unreal to the women now huddled in their bunks. Through a crack in the barrack window, the German midwife, her name was Elise, watched the snow thicken. She rubbed her arms to warm herself, the denim uniform offering little insulation. Her bunkmate nudged her gently. "You delivered babies back home," the woman whispered. Elise nodded. "Do you think they would ever ask for your help here?" the bunkmate asked. Elise shook her head. "These people have everything. They don't need me." The irony settled silently between them. The wind shrieked against the walls. Snow swirled through the tiny gaps in the boards. A few women fought over the last wool blanket, their voices hoarse, their bodies shaking. Tension crackled as loudly as the storm outside, and then a sound cut through the blizzard's roar. A fist pounding on the barrack door, hard, urgent, desperate. Every woman froze. The guard on duty rushed to the entrance, yanked it open, and a gust of snow burst inside, swirling in, violent spirals. In the doorway stood a tall American soldier, his coat dusted white, his breath steaming in the freezing air. His skin, dark as coal, contrasted sharply against the blizzard. A black American soldier from the segregated engineering battalion assigned to the valley. Behind him, the storm raged like a living beast. His voice boomed into the crowded barrack. "We need the midwife. Now." 43 German women stared back in stunned silence. Elise rose slowly, heartbeat thundering in her chest. The soldier locked eyes with her. "Hurry," he said. "A woman's in labor, and she won't survive the storm without you." The door slammed shut behind them, swallowed instantly by the white fury outside. The shock had begun. The wind clawed at Elise's face as she stepped out of Barrack 12B, the black American soldier urging her forward through the roaring white. Snow whipped sideways, blinding, stinging, alive. Every instinct inside her screamed to turn back. No prisoner stepped willingly into a storm with their captors, and certainly not escorted by a man her government had taught her to fear more than any other. He held a lantern low against the gale, its flame struggling. "This way," he shouted. His voice vanished into the blizzard before it reached her ears fully. She followed only because the alternative was to freeze in her tracks. Behind her, inside the barrack, panic had erupted the moment the door slammed shut. A few women screamed, others clutched their blankets, and one collapsed, fainting. For them, a soldier bursting in during a storm meant only one thing: punishment, removal, execution. Propaganda in Germany had carved that belief into their bones. Now Elise carried that terror with every step. She had learned fear long before America. Years earlier, in Hamburg, she had delivered babies in the basement of the Altona Hospital while the sky above shook under British incendiaries. She remembered the sound, like the crack of the world splitting open. She remembered running through corridors filled with smoke, carrying a newborn whose first breath came mixed with ash. She remembered women screaming as bombs fell, doctors crying when medicine ran out, tiny bodies wrapped in sheets when oxygen tanks failed. She had saved some. She had lost more, and the losses haunted her. When the war tightened around Hamburg and rations shrank, she volunteered as a Luftwaffe auxiliary, partly for better food, partly because she believed the fatherland needed every hand. The training was sterile, orderly. The propaganda was relentless. American soldiers were monsters, they told her, especially the black ones, inhuman, violent, brutal. Degenerate blood, the instructors said, savages hiding behind industrial power. Those words slipped back into her mind now as she followed one through the white void of a Wyoming storm. Every crunch of snow beneath her boots reminded her of transport marches in France, long lines of captured auxiliaries trudging through mud, watching the weakest fall behind. She had seen a friend, Lotta, collapse beside a riverbank, lips blue. The guards hadn't struck her. They hadn't shouted. They simply lifted her into a truck already filled with the sick. Lotta never reappeared. Then the Atlantic crossing, the cold, the smell of diesel, the tight quarters, the whispered rumors in the dark. They starve you. They experiment on you. They keep the women separate to do things. The ship had lurched endlessly, metal groaning with every wave. One night, Elise woke to the sound of retching 2 cots over. A girl younger than 20 shivered uncontrollably, her skin pale as a candle wax. By morning, she was gone. Elise had arrived in America convinced she would not leave it alive. "Move!" the soldier shouted again, grabbing her elbow as she stumbled. For a second, she froze. His hand was heavy, warm even through the cold. It shocked her, not the force, but the humanity of it. He was trying to steady her, not drag her. Still, fear squeezed her lungs. The storm blurred everything into shifting shadows. The ranch buildings appeared and disappeared in the white, like ghosts rising and falling. The snow came high enough that Elise had to lift her legs like a soldier marching through water. At last, a weak outline materialized ahead, a ranch house nearly buried beneath snowdrifts. Lantern light flickered behind a window. As they approached the porch, the soldier pounded the door with a gloved fist. It opened almost instantly. The American husband stood inside, broad shoulders, face red from windburn, desperation burning in his eyes. His coat was half-buttoned and snow dusted his hair like ash. When he saw Elise, he exhaled a sound nearly between relief and dread. "You," he said, "come quick. She's getting worse." He didn't smile. He didn't thank her. He didn't offer warmth. He simply stepped aside. Inside the ranch house, the air was warm but tense, filled with the smell of kerosene and fear. The fire snapped weakly in the hearth, barely surviving the drafts that seeped through the walls. The floor trembled whenever the storm hit the windows. On the sofa near the fireplace lay the American woman, her face pale, breath shallow, her hair damp with sweat despite the cold outside. She gripped the blanket beneath her, knuckles white, body curling reflexively with each contraction. Elise approached slowly. She wasn't sure whether to speak. Was she allowed to touch? Would they strike her if she moved wrong? Everything inside her whispered, "This is a trap. They'll blame you if she dies. They'll hang you in the morning." The husband hovered behind her. She could feel his suspicion like a weight on her back. He was a gunner, she realized when she saw the photograph on the mantel. A young man in uniform, arm around a brother dressed in similar fatigues. The brother's photo had a black ribbon pinned around the frame. Elise didn't need to ask. She had heard of the Ardennes, of men frozen in foxholes, of artillery storms swallowing entire units. His grief hung in the room like a ghost. His fear sharpened it, and she, an enemy, stood in the center of it. "You know what you're doing?" he asked. Elise nodded. "Yes." "Really?" His voice cracked. "Because if she dies, if the baby dies—" He didn't finish. He didn't have to. Fear surged through her like a second blizzard. She knelt by the woman, pressing 2 fingers gently to her wrist. The pulse was rapid, unsteady. The woman gasped in pain, and tears slid down her temples. Elise swallowed hard. "She needs warmth," Elise said. "Hot water. Clean cloth." The husband hesitated as if weighing whether he could trust the words of a German. Then he rushed to the kitchen. The black soldier stayed by the door, arms crossed, eyes cautious but not hostile. His presence still unnerved Elise, not because of him, but because of everything she had been taught about men like him. Her instructors in Germany had shown pictures, faked, she now realized, of black soldiers harming civilians. They described them as uncontrollable, violent, less than human. Those stories had curled around her childhood like barbed wire. But this man had carried her through a storm. This man had kept her from falling. This man had risked frostbite to reach a stranger's home. Her mind fought 2 truths. One learned, one seen. Fear battled confusion. Confusion battled reality. And beneath it all lay the simple, suffocating question, if this is not a trap, why would they trust me? The husband returned with a steaming pot. Elise pushed up her sleeves. The wife cried out again, and the room trembled with the sound. Elisa's heart lurched at the familiarity of it, the same desperate cry she had heard in Hamburg during the firestorms, echoing down smoke-filled hallways. She blinked hard, forcing her hands to steady. The husband knelt beside his wife, clutching her hand. His jaw clenched, and she saw fear ripple across his face like a tremor. "Please," he whispered to Elise. "Please, don't let them be taken from me." It was the first moment he sounded like a man talking to another human being, not a prisoner. Elise swallowed. "I will do everything I can," she said. Fear did not leave her, but something else slipped quietly into its place, a fragile thread of responsibility. She checked the woman again. Her training surfaced through the fog of panic. The contractions were close together. The baby was early. The cold had weakened the mother. There was risk of bleeding, risk of shock, risk of losing both. Her throat tightened. "What if I fail?" she thought. "What if they blame me? What if this storm ends with death?" She glanced at the lantern flickering on the table. The storm howled outside, throwing snow against the windows with a force that made the glass groan. They were alone, cut off, 30 miles from help. and the only thing standing between this family and grief was a frightened German woman who once delivered babies under burning skies. The husband squeezed his wife's hand. The soldier watched silently. The blizzard screamed beyond the walls, and Elise, terrified, shivering, praying her hands would not betray her, leaned forward into the dim light and began. The storm did not ease when Elise stepped fully into the ranch house. It only changed shape. Instead of screaming at her through white darkness, the cold now clung to her clothes, seeped into her bones, and made her shiver so violently her teeth clicked. Snow slid from her hair in clumps. Her hands, blue at the fingertips, twitched uncontrollably. The American husband saw it immediately. "Jesus," he whispered, moving toward her. "You're frozen solid." Elise flinched, instinctively stepping back. In every German leaflet she had ever been handed, American men, especially soldiers, were brutes. She had been warned that they struck prisoners for far less than hesitation. But the man didn't raise a hand to her. He only reached for a wool blanket hanging near the stove. He wrapped it around her shoulders gently, the way a father might wrap a blanket around a child who'd wandered in from the cold. The wool was thick, smelling faintly of cedar and smoke. Elise stiffened, unsure if she was permitted to accept the kindness. Her instincts screamed danger, but her body leaned instinctively toward the warmth. Then the man pressed something into her palms. A pair of thick leather gloves, his own. She stared at them as though they were contraband. "Put them on," he said. Her voice shook. Why are you helping me?" He paused, not confused, surprised that she would even need to ask. "Because you're freezing," he said simply. "Because you're human." The words struck her with more force than the wind outside. Human. She hadn't heard anyone use that word for her in years. Not since Hamburg, not since the bombs, not since the camps, not since she'd become a number stitched into uniform cloth. Her throat tightened painfully. She couldn't speak. The black soldier who had escorted her through the storm stepped inside next. Snow clung to his coat, shoulders, eyelashes. He had shielded her from the worst of it, using his own body as a barrier. He closed the door with effort. The wind nearly ripped it out of his hands. "Storm's getting worse," he said. "Road to town's gone." The husband nodded grimly. "We'll handle it here." Elise's fear had not disappeared, but it had changed shape, less sharp now, less deadly, replaced by something unfamiliar, something she was terrified to name. Trust. The soldier approached her, not close enough to make her flinch, just close enough that she couldn't avoid meeting his eyes. "You warm enough to stand?" he asked. She tried to answer, but her jaw shook too hard for words. He nodded, understanding, and guided her gently to the wooden chair beside the stove. His gloved hand hovered at her elbow, ready to catch her if she fell, but careful not to force her. "Sit," he murmured. She lowered herself. The heat from the stove radiated through the blanket, biting at the cold embedded deep in her bones. The soldier crouched, unfastened a canteen from his belt, and poured warm water into a tin cup before handing it to her. She hesitated again. He nudged it toward her. "It's just water," he said softly. She took it with both hands. Steam drifted upward, warming her face. She sipped, slowly at first, then greedily, desperate for something that felt alive inside her chest. She thought of the Atlantic crossing, the bitter, metallic-tasting water, the cold that never left her fingers, the guards who tossed canteens without looking, as if feeding animals. This was different. This felt like care. A frightening thought. She looked up at the soldier again. He wasn't what she had been taught. None of them were. In Germany, the posters had shown black American soldiers as growling beasts with exaggerated muscles and red eyes. Her instructors whispered, "They are the worst. If they capture you, you will beg for death." Yet this man had carried her through a storm so violent it could strip bark from trees. He had shielded her with his arms when the wind nearly knocked her down. He had given her water, blankets, warmth. Nothing made sense anymore. As Elise warmed herself by the stove, her eyes drifted around the small ranch home. It was humble. Wooden beams, rough-planked floors, handmade quilts folded neatly over a rocking chair. Along one wall hung pencil drawings, sketches of cattle, a mountain ridge, a portrait of a dog. On the mantel above the fireplace stood a framed charcoal drawing of a young American soldier grinning widely, one hand shoved into his pocket, the other resting on the shoulder of the man who now stood worrying over his wife. The dead brother, Anzio. The cost carved into this family long before she entered it. Her stomach knotted. She felt like an intruder in a sacred room. The husband noticed her staring at the drawing. His expression softened, but not fully. "That's Mark," he said. "My kid brother." Elise dipped her head. "I am sorry." He nodded once. "War's taken enough from all of us," he said quietly. She didn't know whether he meant that as an olive branch or boundary. Maybe both. The air in the room shifted again when the American woman groaned in pain. Elise flinched, every muscle tensing. Instinct pulled her back to the present. She stood shakily. "I must check her again." The husband helped her without hesitation this time, lifting the edge of the blanket, giving her space. He didn't hover as before, didn't look over her shoulder. Fear still clung to him, but something else had begun to take root. Need, trust, hope. "Elise," he said suddenly, as if remembering her name for the first time. "Tell me what you need." She blinked. No guard had ever asked her that. Not aboard the ship, not in the rail convoys, not in the camps. She'd been told what to do, when to do it, how to stand, how to breathe. This, a question, felt like a miracle. "Hot water," she said, "cloths, and some light." He moved instantly, heading for the kitchen. The black soldier adjusted the lantern. Warm light spread across the room, chasing shadows away. Elise washed her hands in the warm water the husband brought back. Her fingers still trembled, and he steadied the bowl for her. She worked quickly, folding cloths, placing a kettle near the stove for more warm water, arranging towels beside the woman. The husband watched, eyes wide with terror but also with something else, something reverent. Her movements were sure, her voice calm, her presence steady as a mountain. The American woman, pale and sweating, gripped Elise's wrist suddenly. "Please," she gasped. Elise squeezed her hand. "I'm here." The husband swallowed hard. "Thank you. Thank you for helping her." For a moment, Elise felt dizzy, not from the cold, from the kindness. No German officer had thanked her during the bombings. No guard had thanked her on the march. No one had thanked her on the ship. But here, in an American ranch house buried under a storm, a man who had every reason to hate her, who had every reason to blame her for the war that stole his brother, had spoken gratitude. The room felt warmer than the stove could explain. The storm continued to hammer the windows, cracking loudly each time a gust shifted the frame. The black soldier approached and quietly placed his own field jacket behind Elise on the chair. "You're warming up too slow," he murmured. "Use this." She touched the jacket hesitantly. The canvas fabric was heavy, lined with wool, still radiating the heat of his body. She draped it over her shoulders. "Thank you," she said quietly. He nodded once. "Just doing my duty." But Elise could tell he meant more than that. Kindness in America, she was beginning to learn, was not weakness. It was structure. It was principle. It was law. The Geneva Convention was more than ink on paper here. It was something lived. POWs received medical care, letters, food, wages, even education in some camps. America protected its enemies partly to protect its own soldiers captured overseas, but partly because it believed mercy was strength. She remembered hearing a radio in the camp once. Low static, a newsman's voice cutting through. American mercy is a weapon, a powerful one. She had dismissed it. Now she felt it. The American woman cried out again, a long, rising sound that filled every corner of the house. Elise hurried to her side, placing a hand on her shoulder. Her training returned fully now, crisp and clear as if the snowstorm and the barracks and the war were all vanishing behind her. "You are strong," Elise whispered. "You can do this." The woman nodded weakly, tears trembling at the corners of her eyes. Elise turned to the husband. "She needs you here." He knelt instantly, cradling his wife's hand in both of his. The sight hit Elise unexpectedly hard. This was what she had once imagined for herself. Before the bombs, before the hunger, before the war, carved pieces out of her life she could never reclaim. For a moment, warmth flickered in her chest, not from the stove, but from the simple truth. Kindness had crossed the boundary between them. She was no longer just a prisoner. She was a midwife, a woman, a human being. The soldier stepped closer as the storm rattled the walls. "We need to get ready," Elise said. "It will be soon." The husband inhaled sharply. "What do we do?" Elise met his eyes and spoke steadily, gently, with the confidence of someone who had delivered life in the ruins of war. "Stay with her," she said. "We will bring your child safely into this world." He nodded, tears forming. "I trust you." The words hit harder than the wind. He trusted her. Elise swallowed, feeling her throat tighten. Outside, the blizzard screamed with all the fury of a world at war. Inside, kindness, quiet, steady, impossible kindness, built a shelter stronger than any wall. And, for the first time since she arrived in America, Elise felt something bloom inside her chest. Faint, but unmistakable. Hope. The next contraction hit like a wave breaking over rock. The American woman arched her back, a raw sound tearing from her throat. Her fingers dug into the blanket so hard the fabric bunched beneath her nails. Sweat beaded on her brow despite the icy drafts slithering across the floor. Her hair clung to her cheeks in damp strands, eyes squeezed shut against the pain. The house answered with its own shudder. The storm slammed against the walls, sending a low groan through the wooden frame. Snow hammered the windows so fiercely that frost spidered across the glass, thickening with each gust. The oil lamp flickered, its flame shrinking, then leaping wildly as the wind found every crack and seam. Elise braced herself with one hand on the woman's shoulder, the other pressing gently at her lower belly. "Breathe," she said. "In, out. Good. Again." The woman tried, sucking air in short, jagged bursts. Her whole body trembled. From the corner of the room, the black soldier paced once, then stopped, arms wrapped around his chest as if he could hold the walls together by sheer will. His overshirt was gone, draped over the back of a chair to dry. Now he shrugged out of his wool sweater without a word and crossed the room. "Here," he said to Elise, voice rough. "You're still shaking." She hadn't realized she was. Her own fingertips trembled so much they looked like they belonged to someone else. She wanted to protest, to say the woman needed it more, but the soldier didn't give her a chance. He draped the sweater around her shoulders, tucking it in close. cold bit instantly at his exposed arms. Goosebumps rose along his dark skin. The room wasn't warm enough for bare forearms, not with a storm like this. But he didn't flinch. Elise stared at him, throat tight. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you freeze for me?" He met her eyes, something like confusion and conviction mingling in his gaze. "Because you're working," he said, "and she needs you steady. That's enough." It was such a simple answer. It hit her like a blow. In Germany, people froze in shelters while officers hoarded coats and fur-lined gloves. Mothers clutched blue-lipped infants as officials walked past, promising victory, not blankets. She had watched women shiver in stairwells while men in uniforms rode away in heated cars. Here, a man who had every reason to despise her was willing to stand in the cold so she could save a stranger. Her chest ached. Another contraction crashed through the woman. She cried out, the sound raw and desperate. The husband knelt at his wife's side, his face nearly as pale as hers. He had removed his own heavy coat earlier, draping it over his wife's legs to keep them warm as her body fought against the storm inside and outside at the same time. Without it, his shoulders shook with cold, but his hands stayed wrapped around hers. "Tell me what you need," he pleaded, looking at Elise. "Please, anything." The question broke something loose inside her. For a moment, she wasn't in Wyoming. She was in Hamburg again. The air was thick with smoke. The hospital trembled as bombs walked across the city in neat, calculated rows. Sirens screamed. Somewhere, a church bell rang once, then fell silent. "Tell me what you need," a mother had begged her back then, clutching her newborn to her chest. "Tell us what to do," a doctor had said, hands empty because the morphine had run out days earlier. "Tell me he will live," another woman had whispered over a tiny, motionless body. Elise had needed medicine, bandages, clean water, time. She had none of it. Here, there was pain, fear, danger, but there were also blankets, boiling water, soap, steady light, 2 strong pairs of hands ready to help on command. A house made of wood that might creak and groan but would not collapse into a crater. The contrast squeezed her heart until she could barely breathe. The next time the woman cried out, the sound overlapped with another from Elise's memory, a German woman screaming as fire sucked the oxygen from an underground shelter. The cries merged until Elise could not tell which war she stood in, which body she was trying to save. Her vision blurred. Her voice broke. "I could not save them." The husband stared at her, breathing hard. "What?" he asked. She pressed a cloth between the woman's legs, frowning at the blood that welled up. Not catastrophic. Not yet. But enough to send spikes of alarm up her spine. Her hands shook. "I could not save them," she repeated, the words tearing out before she could stop them. "In Hamburg. The babies. The mothers. The bombs. The medicine was gone. The hospital." Her voice cracked. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to focus. The woman on the sofa moaned, turning her head side to side. "I must save her," Elise whispered. "I must." She hadn't meant to say it aloud, but once spoken, it hung in the air, a vow binding all 3 of them together. The storm hit the house with a fresh blast, the floorboards trembling. Snow piled higher against the windows, turning the world outside into a milky blur. The oil lamp guttered again. For one terrifying heartbeat, the flame nearly went out. The black soldier stepped forward, cupping his hands protectively around the glass. "Stay with us," he muttered to the light as if it could hear. "Just a little longer." Elise bent closer to the woman. "You're doing well," she said. I know it hurts, but you are strong." The woman's eyes opened. For a moment, they locked onto Elise's. Will my baby live?" she managed. The question carved through Elise's composure like a knife. She saw burned-out stairwells. She saw cribs covered in dust. She saw doctors turning away, shoulders slumped. Her lip trembled. She bit down hard, tasting blood. "Yes," she said, "we will bring your child through." She didn't know how she could promise such a thing, but she knew she had to. The husband made a sound that was almost a sob. "Just tell me what you need," he said again. "Please." This time, the words hit differently, not as a polite question, as surrender. He was handing her everything, his wife's life, his child's, his trust, across a gulf of uniforms and languages and propaganda. The barrier she had built around her heart for years, layer after layer of suspicion, anger, self-preservation, cracked. "More cloths," she said thickly, and if you pray, you should do that too." He staggered to his feet, rushed to fetch more clean linens, then sank to his knees by his wife's head. "Lord," he whispered, voice shaking, "I never thought I'd ask you this for a German's hands, but guide them, please." Elise bowed her head for a moment, eyes stinging. No one in Germany had prayed for her hands. They had ordered them, used them, demanded from them, but never prayed over them. A sound escaped her, a choked, broken thing halfway between a sob and a gasp. The contraction that followed was the worst yet. The woman nearly arched off the sofa, a long, ragged scream ripping from somewhere deep in her chest. Elise held her down gently, murmuring, "Breathe, breathe, breathe," over and over, though she wasn't sure which of them she was talking to, anymore. When the pain ebbed, Elise checked again. Her breath caught. "It is time," she said. "The baby is coming." What followed blurred into a series of moments that would replay in all their minds for the rest of their lives. The storm outside roared louder, as if trying to drown out the struggle inside. The house creaked and moaned, but held. The lamp sputtered, then steadied. The soldier's bare arms glistened with goosebumps, but he did not move from his watch. The husband wiped his wife's forehead with shaking hands, whispering her name over and over like a shield. Elise knelt between the woman's knees, hands steady at last, voice low and commanding. "Again," she said. "Push." The woman bore down, biting back a scream. Blood smeared the cloths. Elise felt panic coil in her stomach. What if it was too much? What if the life was draining out of this woman just as it had from so many others? For a split second, her vision swam. Hamburg surged up again, a wave of smoke and flame and the memory of holding a still warm infant who would never cry. Her composure shattered. Tears filled her eyes. "I could not save them," she whispered, not sure if anyone could hear her over the storm, over the woman's cries, over the pounding of her own heart. "I could not save them." A sob choked her. She clenched her jaw, forced herself to breathe. "I must save her." The husband heard that. He looked down at Elise, this enemy who knelt in his living room, wrapped in his blanket, wearing his gloves and his comrade's sweater, crying for women she had failed to save in another ruined city half a world away. He slid from his wife's side to kneel beside Elise. Not above her, beside her. His knee touched the floor next to hers. "Tell me what you need," he said again, voice breaking completely now. "Whatever it is, I'm here." No one had ever said that to her during a birth, not in Germany, not in the shelters, not in the makeshift wards where the sick outnumbered the healthy 10-1. For a moment, the weight of everything, bombed hospitals, empty medicine cabinets, stacked bodies, her own numb survival, collapsed onto her shoulders. She let out a raw sound, a cry dragged from the deepest, coldest part of her memories. "Stay," she said, tears streaming. "Do not leave her. Hold her hand. Let her feel you are here. That is what I need." He nodded, immediately scrambling back to his wife's side, clasping her hand in both of his once more. "I'm here, honey," he whispered. "I'm right here. You're not alone." The woman cried out as another contraction seized her. This one felt different, deeper, more final. Elise braced herself. "Good," she said. "Good. Again. One more. One big push. Bring your baby to us." The woman screamed, pushing with a strength Elise suspected she didn't know she had. The storm outside hurled itself against the house in one last, furious roar. And then, in the tiny circle of light cast by the oil lamp, something new entered the world. A slick, squirming weight slid into Elise's waiting hands. For an instant, everything went silent in her chest. Time slowed. She lifted the baby carefully, fingers moving by instinct after so many years. She wiped the tiny face with a clean cloth, cleared the mouth, rubbed the small back briskly. "Come on," she whispered in German, the words slipping out without her control. "Come on, little one. Cry. Show them you are here." For a heartbeat, nothing. Only the hiss of the storm. Only the choked sobs of the mother. Only the father's breath held so tight his chest barely moved. Then the baby inhaled. A thin, wavering sound emerged, and then a full, sharp, furious wail. It cut through the room like a bell. It cut through the storm itself. The baby's cry rose and fell in uneven, beautiful bursts. The sound tore through Elise's chest, ripping past every wall she had built around herself. She burst into tears. Not quiet ones, but great trembling sobs that shook her shoulders. She had held too many silent infants. She had wrapped too many small bodies in linen. This one cried, loudly, insistently, defiantly. She looked up at the mother. "You have a daughter," Elise said, voice breaking. "She is strong." The American woman let out a laugh that turned instantly into a sob. She reached trembling hands toward the child. Elise placed the baby in her arms, guiding her fingers into the right position, supporting the tiny head. The father stared as if he had never seen anything so miraculous. His knees gave out. He dropped to the floor beside Elise, this time not in desperation, but in something like awe. He looked at his wife, at his daughter, at Elise, and then he did something she would play over in her mind for years. He reached forward, placed his hand on her shoulder, and said in a hoarse whisper, "You saved my family." She tried to shake her head, to protest, to say it was the mother's strength, God's grace, the storm's mercy. But the words wouldn't come. Only tears. The black soldier exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His bare arms glistened with cold sweat, but his face shone with a quiet, stunned joy. Outside, the blizzard still raged. Snow piled against the walls, wind shrieked past the eaves, and the world remained very much at war. But inside that small Wyoming ranch house, for one fragile moment, something else entirely reigned. Not hatred, not propaganda, not victory or defeat. Just a child's first cry, an enemy's trembling hands, and an American man on his knees before a German prisoner, thanking her for saving everything he loved. The storm eased sometime after dawn, though no one noticed at first. The house had become its own world, warm, dim, and hushed, lit by the glow of a kerosene lamp and the soft, new sound of a baby's breathing. Snow still pressed against the windows, but the furious shrieking wind had softened to a weary sigh that rattled gently through the eaves. Inside, everything felt changed. The American woman slept now, cradling her daughter against her chest, their breaths rising and falling in a fragile rhythm of survival. The husband sat beside them, one hand still resting on his wife's arm, though exhaustion tugged at his eyelids. Every so often he glanced at the child, as if needing constant proof she was truly there and truly alive. Near the stove, wrapped in blankets and the soldier's sweater, Elise sat quietly, her hands still trembling, not from cold now, but from the aftershocks of everything that had happened. Her face was streaked with dried tears. Her eyes were hollowed, raw, and wide with realization. The soldier tended the fire, moving with slow, deliberate care. His arms were still bare from the night, but in the warmer room his muscles no longer shivered. When he glanced toward Elise, it was with the expression one gives an equal, not a prisoner. For a long time, no one spoke. The room felt held together by silence, as if words might break it. At last, Elise reached into the pocket of the borrowed sweater and pulled out a small, battered notebook, her POW journal, issued by the camp. The pencil stub, tucked inside, shook slightly as she held it. She opened to a blank page. The husband noticed. He watched as she rested the notebook on her knees and lowered her head, hair falling like a curtain around her face. Her pencil moved slowly at first, then steadily. She wrote for a long time. When she finally stopped, the soldier, quietly carrying a cup of hot water to sip, asked softly, "You writing home?" She shook her head. "No, writing truth." He nodded and returned to the fire. The husband, curiosity outweighing hesitation, leaned slightly in her direction. "What did you write?" She hesitated. Then, perhaps because something inside her had shattered open during the birth, she answered with honesty her old self would never have dared. "I wrote," she said slowly. "Here. The enemy is kinder to me than my own country ever was." The husband inhaled sharply. The soldier froze, fire poker halfway to the hearth. Elise lifted her eyes. They glistened, but the gaze was steady. "In Germany," she murmured, "people starve. Babies die in cold rooms. Hospitals crumble. Officials tell us to endure, to sacrifice, to obey. But they do not care for the weak. Not anymore. Not truly." She looked toward the baby, sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. "Here," she whispered, "even a prisoner is given blankets, food, warmth, a chance." Her voice cracked. "Even a prisoner is trusted with a life." The husband bowed his head. His throat worked as he swallowed. My brother used to say something," he murmured almost to himself, "before he shipped out." He looked at Elise, eyes hollow with memory but bright with conviction. He said, "If we forget mercy, we forget what we're fighting for." The words drifted into the warm air like embers. For a moment, Elise couldn't breathe. Mercy. The word carried weight she hadn't felt in years. In Germany, mercy had been described as weakness, a soft, decadent flaw of democracies, something to be exploited, not admired. But last night, mercy had been the only reason she was alive. Mercy had carried her through a storm. Mercy had wrapped her in blankets. Mercy had placed gloves in her hands, soup in her mouth, trust in her work. Mercy had looked at her, a German, an enemy, and said, "You are human." She turned slightly away, unable to hide the fresh tears gathering in her eyes. Later, when the storm finally broke enough for the soldier to radio the nearest outpost, a rescue truck came plowing through the drifts. They brought medical supplies, thick wool blankets, canteens of hot coffee, and a thermos of beef stew. Not for the American family. For Elise. 2 medics approached her with professional gentleness, guiding her to sit near the fire while they checked her pulse, her fingers, the early signs of frostbite. One draped yet another U.S. Army blanket over her shoulders, this one softer and heavier than the others, lined with thick cotton batting. She stared at them in bewildered silence. "We take care of everyone in a storm," one medic said. "Uniform doesn't matter. Uniform doesn't matter." The phrase felt impossible. It ricocheted around her mind, shattering old beliefs like brittle glass. In Germany, a difference in uniform defined whether one ate or starved, lived or was left behind. Here, in this strange and powerful country, someone's value didn't vanish when they lost a war. Here, being human was enough. A bowl of stew was placed in her hands. She held it carefully, as if afraid it might disappear. The smell, rich beef, onions, carrots, rose into the warm air. She had eaten in the POW camp, but nothing like this. This was not rations. This was comfort. This was nourishment prepared for a person, not an enemy. As she sipped the broth, her body thawed from the inside out. A warmth spread through her chest, and suddenly she couldn't stop shaking. Not from cold, but from a deep, overwhelming confusion. Why? Why would a country give so much to those who had taken so much from it? Why would they show mercy to people who wouldn't have shown it in return? Why feed them? Why clothe them? Why save them? The soldier noticed her trembling. "You're safe," he said. "That's why." Safe. The word was a foreign taste on her tongue. By midday, the mother and newborn had been moved to the bedroom to rest. The husband walked back into the living room and stopped in front of Elise. His face looked different now, no longer tense with suspicion or exhaustion, but open, humbled. "You saved her," he said. "Both of them." She shook her head. "She saved herself. He cut her off gently. "No, you saved them." His voice grew quieter. "And I know what your people are going through this winter. I hear the radio. Berlin's in ruins. Hospitals gone. Babies dying from cold and hunger. And I'm sorry." The apology stunned her. An American apologizing for her suffering. A German, from the side that had invaded half of Europe. She looked away quickly, tears threatening again. "I do not understand this country," she whispered. He gave a soft, sad smile. "Most folks don't, even those born here. But mercy's a thing we try to do right." He hesitated, then added, "My brother, Mark, he believed America should win the war without losing its soul." Her breath caught. He continued, "I think, if he could see you here, see what you did for my family, he'd say we're doing it right." Elise covered her mouth with one hand. A quiet cry escaped. She wasn't crying for the storm, or the cold, or the exhaustion. She was crying because something inside her had shifted in a way she couldn't undo. That afternoon, when the rescue truck prepared to take her back to the camp, she paused at the threshold of the ranch house. Snow glittered under a weak slice of sunlight. The mountains rose white and sharp against a clearing sky. She turned to look at the American mother, resting with her child in her arms. The husband beside them, the soldier by the fire, the blankets, the stew, the kindness. Her voice trembled. "Thank you for treating me as—" She struggled with the English word, "as human." The husband stepped forward. "You are," he said softly. "We just remembered it last night." She climbed into the back of the truck. The soldier handed her one last thing before she left, his wool sweater, folded neatly. "For the road," he said. "But—" "It is yours," she replied. He shook his head. "You need it more." She clutched it like a lifeline. As the truck rumbled away, Elise opened her journal again and wrote beneath her morning entry, "What I witnessed here, this mercy, that is the power Germany feared, but never understood, not bombs, not factories, not ships, but humanity, a nation strong enough to be gentle." She paused, then added one final line, "And today, that strength saved a child. And me." Years later, long after the war, long after the camps emptied and the POWs sailed home to a Germany in ruins, men and women like Elise would write in their memoirs that America had changed them forever. They returned not with hatred, but with something radical for a defeated people: admiration, hope, a belief that democracy could be compassionate, that power could be moral, that nations could be generous even in victory. Many became teachers, engineers, doctors, supporters of democratic reforms. A few returned to America to build new lives. The baby born in the storm would grow up hearing the story of the German woman who saved her, and Elise in her old age would still keep the soldier's sweater folded in a wooden drawer, unrepaired, unworn, preserved exactly as it was the night mercy changed her forever. For the first time in a long and bitter war, Elise understood a truth no propaganda could erase. Sometimes the greatest victory a nation can claim is not over an enemy's army, but over an enemy's heart. The storm finally cleared 2 days later. The sky over Alpine Valley glowed an icy blue, the kind that appears only after nature has spent all its fury. Snowdrifts rose in soft, rounded waves across the fields, the ranch roofs peeking out like small islands in a frozen sea. From the road leading toward town came the slow crunch of wagon wheels and truck tires, neighbors checking on one another after the blizzard, bringing food, tools, coffee in battered thermoses. And with them came the story. It moved from porch to porch, from barn to general store, from coffee pot to church pew. A German prisoner delivered the Henderson baby. In the middle of the storm, saved both mother and child. At first, people blinked in disbelief. A German POW? A woman helping an American family? And not just helping, saving. But disbelief softened into something else as the details spread. How the American family had opened their door to her, how the black soldier had shielded her from the storm, how the enemy had worked through tears and trauma to bring life into a world drowning in death. Shock cracked open into awe. Awe warmed into gratitude. Gratitude bloomed into pride. By Sunday, the tiny white-steepled church at the edge of the valley was full. Snow still clung to the windowsills as the congregation gathered in heavy coats, boots dripping meltwater onto the wooden floor. Reverend Whitaker, a thin man with silver hair and a voice that always trembled on the first hymn, stepped to the pulpit. He cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "This week," he began, "our community saw something remarkable." A quiet murmur rippled through the room. The congregation already knew what was coming. "We saw mercy," the Reverend said simply. "Not politics, not propaganda, not fear. Mercy." His hands rested on the worn edges of the pulpit. "And I believe—" He paused, eyes drifting over the rows of ranchers, farmers, wives, and children. "That kindness is the truest victory we can claim in a world like ours." A few nodded, others wiped their eyes. Even those who had sons fighting in Europe felt something soften inside them. At Camp Alpine, the reaction was different, but no less profound. The commanding officer summoned Elise to the administrative office 3 mornings after the birth. Snow crunched beneath her boots as she walked across the yard, flanked by 2 guards. Her heart hammered, a familiar fear tightening her chest. Had she broken a rule? Done something wrong? Inside, the room smelled of coffee and typewriter ink. The officer gestured for her to sit. She did, hands folded stiffly in her lap. He cleared his throat, adjusted his cap, and slid a crisp document across the desk. "Prisoner Miller," he said, "by order of the United States Army. You are hereby commended for exceptional conduct and assistance in a medical emergency." She blinked. Her hands moved toward the paper as if afraid it might vanish. "You saved lives," the officer continued. "Even under conditions that would have broken most seasoned nurses. Your actions reflect credit on yourself and—" He hesitated, then added, "on the better parts of humanity." For a long moment, Elise could not speak. She bowed her head slightly. "Thank you. Sir?" The officer nodded. "You'll receive a copy to keep, and the International Red Cross will be notified." She left the office in a daze, clutching the document like a fragile glowing thing. Outside, a few POW women stood waiting near the barracks. Word had already traveled, their faces lit with astonished pride. "You really did it," one whispered. Another touched Elise's arm. "The Americans. They thanked you." Elise's eyes stung. She nodded, barely able to breathe. Life in camp changed after that. The storm had ripped down the barracks' outer wall, so repairs filled the yard with noise, hammering, sawing, shouted instructions in English and German. During breaks, the American guards played harmonica near the fire barrels, the notes floating above the snow like thin blue smoke. Some POW women gathered nearby, drawn despite themselves. One guard, a lanky kid from Texas, played an old cowboy tune and winked. "Bet you don't hear this in Hamburg." A few women smiled awkwardly. One even laughed, small, shocked at its own existence. The kitchen served hot meat stew that week, richer than usual, bolstered by emergency supplies brought in after the storm. The women ate slowly, savoring the warmth that spread through their frozen hands and hollow stomachs. 3,000 calories a day. More than most working civilians in Germany. More than her mother likely ate in a week. At the English classes held in the recreation hut, more POWs attended than ever before. They repeated phrases back to the American instructor. "This is a book. My name is—" "Thank you." Elise sat in the back, tracing her fingers over the words in her new vocabulary sheet. She didn't say much, but she listened, soaking up every syllable like thawing earth-absorbing sunlight. Sometimes, between lessons, the black soldier, Corporal Lewis, talked about home. "Alabama's hot enough to fry an egg on the porch," he'd say with a grin. "My mama makes peach cobbler that'd win any county fair." Other times, "I've got a little sister in Chicago. She wants to be a nurse. Says she'll fix the whole world if they just give her a clean pair of gloves." His stories landed gently on the POWs, like snowflakes softening their guard. He was no monster, no propaganda demon, just a man with a home, a mother, a sister who dreamed of healing. One evening, while peeling potatoes for kitchen duty, a POW whispered to Elise, "Do you think maybe they're not like what we were told?" Elise glanced through the window where a guard was helping another prisoner carry a heavy crate, smiling as he adjusted his grip. She nodded slowly. "No, they are not." That night she wrote another journal entry. "America is not the enemy our teachers described. It is something else entirely, a place where even those at war remember kindness. A place where an enemy may be cold, hungry, frightened, and still be given blankets, food, and hope." She hesitated, then added, "If my family could see this, they would not believe it, but perhaps someday they will." In town, the Henderson baby became local legend. At the general store, customers whispered, "That German girl." Imagine the courage. And makes you wonder if the good Lord puts the right people in storms on purpose. A sense of quiet pride settled over the valley, not the pride of victory in battle, but the pride of having chosen decency when the world expected cruelty. Weeks later, when the baby's first photograph, pink-faced, wrapped in a quilt, appeared in the local newspaper, the headline read, "Life in the Storm. POW Midwife Saves Wyoming Mother and Child." And beneath it, "In times of war, humanity remains our greatest strength." Old-timers clipped the article for their scrapbooks. Mothers read it aloud to their children, and more than one reader murmured, "They don't make days like these anymore." By the time spring melted the last of the drifts, letters began arriving from Germany. Thin envelopes carrying news of hunger, ration cards, shortages, cold. Some women cried silently as they read. Others showed the letters to guards, who shook their heads with quiet sympathy. Elise received a letter too. Her mother was alive. Barely. She wrote back with trembling hands, "America feeds us. America warms us. America sees us as human." It was the truest thing she had ever written. Life in the camp continued. Work details, lessons, potato peeling, harmonica music, the smell of stew, the hum of English chatter blending with German laughter for the first time. And through it all, a gentle, impossible reality settled in. The country they had been told to fear was the one keeping them alive. For many, it was a revelation. For Elise, it was a rebirth. And for the American community watching from the outside, the story became something they passed down to their children, not as a tale of war, but as a memory of what America could be when it chose compassion over vengeance. A reminder that kindness, quiet, steady, stubborn kindness, could turn even enemies into witnesses of grace. A reminder of a nation they feared was slipping away. A reminder of the America they longed to return to. The winters in Alpine Valley never truly softened, no matter how many decades passed. Snow still drifted in high banks against fences, wind still hissed across the fields, and the mountains still wore their icy crowns each January. But for one family in the valley, winter had long carried a different meaning, one bound to a memory that refused to fade. The baby, born in the blizzard of 1945, grew into a woman with silver hair and gentle eyes. By the time she reached her 70s, she had told the story of her birth so many times her grandchildren could recite the first lines by heart. "I arrived in a storm," she would begin, "carried into this world by the hands of a woman who was supposed to be my enemy." Above the fireplace in her home hung a photograph, sepia-toned, slightly creased. In it, a young German woman stood shyly between the American couple she saved. The newborn, wrapped in a crocheted blanket, slept peacefully in her mother's arms. The POW midwife looked thin, tired, but unmistakably proud. The family called the photo "the gift in the blizzard." Every Christmas, every birthday, every gathering, the grandchildren asked the same question. "Is that really her? The German woman who saved you?" And the elderly woman would smile softly. "Yes," she said. "Her name was Elise, and she saved more than my life. She saved something America believed about itself." After the war, Elise returned to a Germany unrecognizable. Cities were rubble. Stores were empty. Families waited in long lines for powdered milk and black bread. But in her suitcase, folded beneath the Red Cross papers, she carried 3 precious things. A wool blanket from the Henderson home, a tin cup once filled with hot cocoa by an American nurse, a handwritten note from Corporal Lewis, "We don't leave people to die." She kept them for the rest of her life. In old age, she told her children that those items were proof of a miracle. Not a miracle of faith, but of decency. Proof that she had seen, in the darkest year of the war, what strength looked like when it refused to be cruel. Germany gave us commands, she would say. America gave us compassion. She wrote a memoir in her 60s. It never became famous, but passages of it circulated among POW historians. America fed our mothers when Germany could not. America protected them when Europe burned. America showed mercy when mercy was impossible. That page would eventually be read aloud across oceans. One winter, nearly 8 decades after the blizzard, a group of German visitors arrived quietly in Wisconsin. They were descendants of POWs who had once worked in the very labor camps scattered across the Midwest. Historians guided them through old foundations and museum exhibits, pointing out where barracks once stood. The snow fell softly that afternoon as the group approached a small memorial marker placed where Camp Alpine had stood. A young man stepped forward, tall, solemn, carrying a bouquet of white lilies. He knelt in the snow. "My grandmother was Elise Muller," he said in accented English. "She told us that America saved her life, and saved the life of a child she delivered here." He placed the lilies on the memorial. "Thank you," he whispered, voice cracking, "for saving my grandmother, and for showing her a kind of mercy she never forgot." Behind him, others bowed their heads. Some wept quietly. To the Americans watching, from museum staff to passing locals, the sight struck deep, reaching a place beneath history, beneath politics, beneath war. It was gratitude in its purest form. Back in Alpine Valley, the now elderly Blizzard baby sat with her grandchildren by the fire, the same way her mother had once held her. Snow fell outside the window, soft and familiar. She lifted the old photograph of Elise from the mantel and placed it on her lap. "This," she said, tapping the faded image, "is what America meant to the world once. Not just power, not just victory, but mercy, the kind that changes people, the kind that rebuilds nations." Her eldest grandson frowned thoughtfully. "Do we still have that?" he asked. "That kind of America?" The room fell quiet. She looked into the fire, its glow reflecting in her tired eyes. "Some days," she said softly. "I'm not sure, but I know we had it once, and that means we can have it again." She reached for the photograph once more, her fingers trembling over the young German woman who had cried when the baby finally wailed in her arms. "Greatness," she murmured, "isn't about winning wars. It's about being good when the world expects you to be cruel." She placed the picture back on the mantel. "That was the gift my family received. A gift from the greatest generation, a generation strong enough to be gentle." In the years that followed, descendants of POWs across America would write letters to towns like Alpine Valley. "My grandfather survived because an American guard shared his food. My grandmother said the U.S. Army saved her dignity. My family exists today because America chose mercy over vengeance." These letters would be read at veterans' halls, church basements, and local historical societies. People would sit quietly, listening, some with hands over their hearts, some wiping tears they didn't expect. Because in those words, they heard an echo of something they feared America was losing, a nation united not by perfection, but by decency. A country that understood mercy as a form of strength, a people who believed that even an enemy deserved a chance to live. The story of the Blizzard baby and the POW midwife eventually found its way into textbooks, documentaries, and family lore. Not because it was the most dramatic event of the war, but because it revealed something rare and powerful. that in a time of global destruction, an American home had become a sanctuary, that a German prisoner had become a healer, that a child's cry had become a promise, that humanity could survive even when empires could not. And so, each January, when the snow began to fall and the wind hummed through the valley, the Henderson family lit a single candle by the window, a quiet tribute, a reminder, a symbol of what America once represented to a frightened young woman in POW denim: mercy as power, strength as generosity, victory as humanity. And in that small flame flickering against the winter cold, the legacy lived on.